Chapter 1 of Mystery at Number 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Huiell SEAMAN. Chapter 1. Who was she? It would be difficult to say just why they had selected Number 6 to explore on that particular afternoon. Mere chance had a large element in it. So had the fact that it was the only pool within many miles of their vicinity with which they had not already become intimately acquainted. Lastly, it was the farthest removed. They had to travel 12 miles in the little Ford to get to it. Bernice lay contentedly at the edge of a sand embankment white as driven snow, her chin cupped in her hands, watching half a dozen or more mullets drift and swing in the limpid, clear water below. Sidney roamed along the sides of the pool, a hunting rifle under his arm, also speculatively watching a brace of larger fish farther away. There is nothing more utterly fascinating than an abandoned South Florida phosphate mine pool, nor is there anything farther removed in appearance from the same mine in full operation. A phosphate mine in full swing is a busy, impressive, and unbeautiful thing. From the great shallow crater, many hundred feet in diameter, clouds of steam arise, making it not unlike a real volcano in effect. Freight cars and locomotives grind back and forth on the sidings, carrying away the mined material. Huge hydraulic pipes are woven across the mine space, and at one side an immense washer, resembling nothing so much as the structure of a scenic railway in an amusement park, blots out the skyline. But the active usefulness of any one phosphate mine is short-lived. When its capacity for yielding the valuable commodity is reached, and phosphate is not generally found more than 50 feet below the surface, the mine is promptly abandoned. All the paraphernalia of mining is moved to another region, and the gaping hole is left, a horrid blot on the beautiful Florida landscape. But nature seems to love that sunny land, and in a singularly short time she provides a wonderful remedy for the desecration. In a few weeks the great cavity has become filled with crystal clear water. Vegetation creeps rapidly over the ravaged environs, and, strangest of all, fish in shoals outnumbered find their way mysteriously into the new pool, doubtless through subterranean channels, making it a paradise for the angler. And so the unlovely mine has become a little gem of a lake. The longer the scene has been deserted, the more attractive and alive with fish. "Sidney," called Bernice presently to her cousin, now standing some 50 feet away, "I never saw anything to equal the fish in this pool. There are more of them and bigger than in any of the other pools you've shown me." "That's because this is an old pool," the boy replied. "I think they say it's the oldest mine pool anywhere in this region. Hasn't been worked for 12 or 15 years. Look at that bouncer over there. I'm going to get him." He pointed to a large pike lazily floating by, about 15 feet out from where he stood. "But, Sid, you didn't bring your rod," retorted the girl. "How do you expect to get him without a line?" "I told you I was going to show you something new when we came out today. I am. Just you watch." He waited till the pike was well opposite where he stood on the bank. Then he raised his rifle to his shoulder, aimed at a point just underneath the fish, and fired. When the explosion and the resultant splash were over, the fish was seen floating on its back. It happened that the bank at this point shelved rather gradually out into the water. Sidney sprang in, waded almost to the top of his hip boots, and caught the slippery body just as it had suddenly revived and was about to dive away. He bore it, still frantically flopping, to the shore, and deposited it in his basket. "Sidney!" gasped Bernice. "Where did you ever learn that?" "A man that had hunted in Canada told me about it. It's a great trick. You only stun the fish, but if you don't get him double quick he revives and gets away. Sometimes I bring a fishing spear along to get them out that way. Hi! There's another, right close by." He was off again in a twinkling, eager for another catch, and Bernice sat up to watch him with keen interest. But this time he was not so successful. He overshot his mark, and his prize, when the water settled, was nowhere to be seen. After that he stood intent for a long time, waiting with a sportsman's patience for another chance, and Bernice settled down again, watching him idly. Every little while she drew a long breath of content and snuggled down closer into the hot white sand. On the opposite side of the pool was an ancient orange grove, and the scent of orange blossoms was wafted to her with every puff of wind. "Oh, I'm glad I've come to live in Florida," she sighed aloud. Then she continued to meditate on the very opportune opening that had come to her father, who was not very well, to settle in Florida near his brother in the phosphate region, and give his engineering knowledge to the mining interests. Her cousin Sidney had lived in Florida for several years, but she was having her first taste of it in the last glorious month. Every afternoon she and her cousin had spent in the little Ford, exploring the country far and wide. While she watched now, Sidney raised his rifle for another shot, and again missed. "Fired too low," he called back in explanation, and roamed on. Neither of them noticed a lithe little figure gliding behind them from bush to bush, keeping always in the shadow of some protecting shelter, and watching them with alert and mystified interest. It would have been a cause of considerable astonishment to them to know they were so closely observed. They did not suppose there was anyone within miles of their vicinity. Presently Bernice scrambled up and announced that she was going to explore the other side of the pool, where the orange grove was, and sauntered off around the edge on her quest. The figure behind the bushes followed noiselessly, keeping always unseen among the scrub palmetto growths. And Bernice, totally unaware of being followed or spied upon, rambled happily along. In the grove she found 3 oranges hanging within reach, although the new blossoms were on the same trees, a combination that never failed to astonish her, and resting under one of the trees she ate 2, saving the biggest for Sidney when he should arrive at that point. Then she roamed again. "Oh, Sidney," she called back, suddenly and excitedly, "do you know there's an old farmhouse here? I didn't suppose there was a house within miles of this place." "I know. It's an old deserted one," he called back. "Hasn't been inhabited for years. I've seen it once or twice when I've been here before." "But it's inhabited now," insisted Bernice. "There's smoke coming out of the chimney and some plants growing in pails and boxes on the porch." "That's queer," he replied. "The place hasn't been lived in for ages. It's all tumbled down. Wait till I get around there and see it with you." The quiet figure behind the palmetto scrub seemed more on the alert than ever, and sat motionless, watching with half-anxious, half-wondering eyes. Sidney lingered several moments to obtain a shot at another tempting fish, and this time waded out, his prize in his grasp. But as his foot touched the bank Bernice heard him give an astonished shout, and looked up to see him struggling desperately with something that was slashing and beating itself about in a furious encounter with him. Without an instant's delay she rushed around the edge of the pool to his assistance. "Don't come near!" he called to her, thumping and laying about him with the butt of his rifle. "It's a horrible snake." He stopped talking, for lack of wind and because every energy was needed to ward off his assailant. It was indeed a snake, as Bernice could plainly see for herself, neither a rattler nor a moccasin, but a hideous creature that was growing steadily bigger and longer and more venomous and horrible in appearance as she watched. It was like nothing she had ever dreamed of or heard of before, an awful nightmare, to see the reptile grow visibly before her very eyes. "Run, Sidney, run!" she implored. "Don't try to fight it. Just get out of its reach." "I can't," he panted. "The horrid thing comes after me whenever I try. I've got to kill it." He lunged at it again with the butt of his gun, and gave a groan of pain, dropping his rifle from the hand that the snake had injured. In the same instant the reptile itself, as if satisfied with the damage it had done, slid noiselessly away into the long grass by the pool's edge. "Oh, Sidney!" cried Bernice in an agony of apprehension. "What shall we do? The creature has stung you. We're miles from home. Is it as poisonous as a rattler or a moccasin, do you think?" "I don't know," muttered the boy, staring down almost stupidly at his wounded wrist. In reality he was a little stunned and stupefied at the suddenness of the attack and the wound he had received. "It hurts a good deal and is growing numb. We'd better get right home. I don't believe I can drive the car. Can you manage it?" "I'll do the best I can," she said. "You know I've only driven a little since you began to teach me. Come, let's get to where we left the car, quickly." She seized his unwounded arm and began to hurry him toward the car, standing far around on the other side of the pool. But the shock and the injury were too much for Sidney. He turned suddenly dizzy and sat down on a sand hammock, sinking his head upon his knees. And Bernice, sure now that he was dying, sank down beside him in despair and began to sob softly. "Please, if you will let me, I think I can help." Bernice looked up in astonishment. She had had no idea there was anyone around. She had not given the subject a thought. And she gasped in further wonder at the figure she saw standing before her. It was a girl, presumably about her own age, 15. She was small in frame, lithe and dark, barefoot and rather unkempt in dress, a ragged blue skirt and soiled white middy blouse being mainly in evidence. The tangled mat of hair was very dark, almost black and unconfined in any way. Her complexion was tanned to a golden brown hue, evidently through long exposure to the sun. But her features were very pleasing and regular, and her eyes were wonderful, great iris blue pupils, surrounded by lashes long and dark, and curling enough to have satisfied a society beauty. It was the eyes, chiefly, that arrested Bernice. Who are you?" she could only stammer. "I live in the house over there." The girl indicated the old farmhouse in the orange grove. I saw what happened. I think I know what to do if you'll let me." "Oh, thank you, so much! Do anything! We'll be so grateful!" cried the distracted Bernice. Without another word the girl bent down and raised the boy's wounded wrist, that he had left hanging limply down. She turned back the cuff of his shirt which, originally rolled to the elbow, had now fallen over the wrist, scanned the wound critically, and then turned to Bernice. "Has he a handkerchief?" Bernice extracted one from his pocket. Sydney all the while inert in the stupor that seemed to possess him. The girl quickly tore it into strips, and with them bound his arm tightly just above the elbow. To make the bandage tighter, she inserted a small stick and twisted it until Bernice almost winced, so white and bloodless did the lower arm suddenly become. Next she laid her lips to the wound and drew out any poisonous matter there might be. Bernice looked on, wide-eyed and apprehensive. Sydney meanwhile revived enough to realize what was going on. "I got awfully dizzy," he said apologetically, and then for the first time, realizing that there was a stranger on the scene, and that this same stranger had been rendering him more than medical service, he braced himself up with an astonished, "Oh, thanks, awfully. You're very good to have done so much. I got stung by something, I guess. Hope it wasn't a rattler." "Indeed, no. It wasn't a rattler. You'd be in terrible shape by now if it had been," replied the girl. "It wasn't even a moccasin. A hog-nosed snake, that's what it was. They're not often seen. They're harmless, but they have a terrible way." "I should say it did," cried the boy. "The little wretch was only about 1.5 feet long when I first saw it lying there. I made a strike at it and it suddenly began to swell up and get longer and longer, and its eyes were like red sparks of fire, and it fought like a perfect demon. I've never come across its like since I've been in Florida. But thank you so much for what you've done. I think you've saved me from having a bad arm, at least." "It was nothing," she said, and suddenly overcome by an unconquerable shyness, now that the crisis was over, she turned on her heel and walked rapidly away, increasing her pace to an actual run when she was sufficiently far away. "Wait! Wait!" cried both the young people. "We want—" But she was out of sight in another moment, and later, as they stared after her, they caught a brief glimpse as she flashed into the old farmhouse and disappeared from view. "That's mighty queer," commented Bernice. "She might have waited a little longer, till we could thank her properly, and find out who she was. But come along now. You must get straight home and have a doctor tend to your arm. She has probably saved you from any immediate bad effects, but you ought to have it cauterized or something. I'll drive, and you can help me out if I get in trouble. Luckily it's not your right arm." As they drove away, in one last glance back at the old farmhouse, they saw the strange girl peeping out at them from the doorway. End of Chapter 1. Read by Sabella Denton.